Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech protected. Good evening and welcome to another edition of What Do You Think? My name is Bill Morse, and as you may or may not know, this is a call-in program. Shortly you'll see the dial-in information at the bottom of the screen. Today is Thursday, September 30th, 2021. There we go. And I wanted to give a special shout out or mention, greeting to my mother, who was born on this day, September 30th, 1930, and who, even though she passed on to the other side 7 years ago, she still gets more mail than I do. Solicitations are interesting. They can find you wherever you move to. And they do not recognize a death certificate because wherever that address is, there's bound to be somebody else living there. If that person is family, more the better. If not, well, then there's a chance that that person, whoever is opening the mailbox, will respond and come across with a donation. My mother's favorite charities, I think, were Indian reservations out in the Dakotas. And so yesterday we had a solicitation about improving education for college students that were Navajo in origin. So Navajo is a different area of the country. And that her help was desperately needed. So anyway, speaking of education, that's going to be the topic this evening. I wanted to first, though, read two short excerpts from a book I rediscovered and shared with Carla. And it's called Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. This is the second edition that I've seen. I believe the first edition came out in the late 60s. And it's a compilation of short stories centered around Zen, which is a philosophy, a way of looking at life that I believe started in Japan and worked its way across China, through India, Europe, and eventually to the United States. And it's a compilation by Paul Reps, who I believe was an American, and Yojin Sensaki, who obviously is Japanese. And so I wanted to start off the program, since we're talking about education, or will be, with one story, and it's called Right or Wrong. When Benkai held his seclusion weeks of meditation, pupils from many parts of Japan came to attend. Bankai was some type of a guru or a sensei, a master. During one of these gatherings, a pupil was caught stealing. The matter was reported to Bankai with the request that the culprit be expelled. Bankai, ignored the case. Later, the pupil was caught in a similar act, and again Bankai disregarded the matter. This angered the other pupils, who drew up a petition asking for the dismissal of the thief, stating that otherwise they would leave in a body. In other words, they would boycott or no longer participate in the seclusion program that they had entered. When Bankai had read the petition, he called everyone before him. You are wise brothers, he told them. You know what is right and what is not right. You may go somewhere else to study if you wish, but this poor brother does not even know right from wrong. Who will teach him if I do not? I am going to keep him, even if it means the rest of you are leaving. A torrent of tears cleansed the face of the brother who had stolen. All desire to steal had vanished. Let's see. One other short story. Let's see. Again, these are a compilation of short stories or anecdotes from Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. If you go online and you want to learn more about the Zen philosophy of how to look at life, Alan Watts, W-A-T-T-S, Alan Watts has a YouTube channel. He passed away in the late 70s, but what's beautiful about technology is his lectures or his talks can live on indefinitely. And he's very interesting and insightful. And I first picked up on him about 25 years ago. And it's a treat. It's very relaxing and refreshing to listen to him during one of his talks before a live audience. All right, so the other anecdote I wanted to share with you. All right. Okay, the thief who became a disciple. One evening, as Shichiri Kojun was reciting sutras. Sutras are like verses of belief, verses or mantras, where you repeat a line, and it has the purpose of reinforcing it into your spirit, whatever the message is behind that line. It's an affirmation of a belief. Well, one evening as Shishuri Kojun was reciting sutras, a thief with a sharp sword entered, demanding either his money or his life. Shishuri told him, "Do not disturb me. You can find the money in that drawer." Then he resumed his recitation of the sutras. A little while afterwards, he stopped and called. "Don't take it all. I need to pay taxes tomorrow. Leave some for the taxes." The intruder gathered up most of the money and started to leave. "Thank a person when you receive a gift," Shishuri added. The man thanked him and made off. A few days afterwards, the fellow was caught and confessed, among others, the offense against Shishuri. When Shishuri was called as a witness, he said, "This man is no thief, at least as far as I am concerned. I gave him the money and he thanked me for it." After he had finished his prison term, the man went to Shishuri and became his disciple. So, two short anecdotes that represent a facet or a facet is a good word, represent a facet of Zen in its outlook on life, on the spirituality of life that is lived according to this discipline. And Zen is not only a belief system, a philosophy, but definitely a discipline. So, as you know, we had no program last week. Oh, first word from our sponsors, tonic water with quinine. Very good for cramps. And I have leg cramps sometimes, but since I've started drinking tonic water with quinine. The cramps have ceased. So, anyway, last week there was no program because there was a presentation at the Opera House on the square here in Bellows Falls on the Star Hotel fire. Many of you may have noticed that there is a firefighters memorial being built right now on the site of the Star Hotel where it burned to the ground. This is a vacant lot along the canal opposite Subway and kind of diagonally across from the post office. So, I had planned to go to that, but I received an email notification about something a little bit more closer to home, and that involved education. There is a group in Vermont, I believe, called Vermont Libertarians or Libertarians for Vermont. Anyway, I got a notification that there was going to be a discussion on critical race theory, known also as CRT. And the discussion was set for Tuesday last week at Commons Park in Springfield. And evidently on Thursday, the Board of Education was going to act on a, not a bill, what do they call that? A proposal to ban CRT or critical race theory from Springfield Public Schools. So about 40 people showed up at the park. There was a pop-up tent, and there were some speakers that had been lined up. I'd say maybe a dozen people were in favor of CRT or critical race theory, and I'd say maybe 20 people were against, and some of them were parents. So I sat down with Oliver, our little dog, and it was a nice day, so I just thought, let me listen and hear what some of these people have to say. I'm curious because I was a teacher at one time, now retired. Hats off to people that try to teach right now, given the circumstances with which they have to work. But anyway, so I noticed that one of the people was a former candidate for governor here in Vermont. His name was John Klar, K-L-A-R. And so I thought, oh, that's interesting. I remember reading up about him when it was time to vote, I guess 2 years ago, for the governor. And Phil Scott won re-election. So people talked, and I think what fired many people up, and it got my attention to say the least, was an article that was part of the Board of Education's package for the Thursday special meeting, on which they would either act or not as to banning the CRT program, critical race theory program, in the curriculum. And I think this is a very important conversation to have. The most important thing Board of Education works on is the budget. How much money gets spent for different programs. Some of the money comes from, I'm going to say 2/3 generally of the money comes from the local tax base, and 1/3 comes from a mixture of grants from the federal level, title programs, and from the state level. Many of these federal and state grants or money, subsidies, take care of special education children that have special needs, children who would not learn otherwise if they were put in a classroom without additional help or guidance. In Bellows Falls, 1 out of every 4 children is special needs, special education, and needs additional help. And of course, that additional help requires money, especially if the child has to be sent out of the district, out of Rockingham, in order to receive that special instruction or additional help and guidance. So after the budget, though, my opinion, the most important aspect of a school board's responsibility is curriculum, overseeing what's being taught in the classroom. And we're talking K through 12. And it's not always best to rely on what your child is saying once they come home from school. It's better if you find out, so to speak, from the teacher, or at least go to a Board of Ed meeting and find out for yourself when curriculum is discussed and you have an opportunity to ask questions. So anyway, just to wrap up the park meeting, it lasted about an hour and a half. Most people that were speaking were not in favor of bringing CRT or critical race theory into the curriculum. There was also a group that was in favor. And I think the sticking point, and I'm going to read it, was the article that was included in the information package that the board was going to use in deciding whether or not to ban CRT in the curriculum. The article was written by Mr. Elijah Hawks. Mr. Hawks was a teacher. He's now a principal. He was a teacher in Randolph, Vermont. I'm not sure if he's a principal in the same district or if he's a principal somewhere else. But he also is part of a group that looks at how children are being taught. And in this article, he deals with white supremacy. So the title of the article, and this article was written August 19th, 2017, is "Do You Teach the Children of White Supremacists?" Now, this is obviously a message for staff, teachers, and by consequence, administrators who give guidance to teachers as to what is taught and how it's taught in the classroom. So the article opens up with, "If you work with white students in this country today, or ever, the answer to this question is yes. You do teach children of white supremacists. White supremacy is a bedrock ideology of this nation. No family is immune to the infection. No family is immune to the inheritance." I found the use of the word infection interesting, especially since this was 4 years ago, before the virus broke out. So, in case you're interested, Mr. Hawks is himself a white man. And so I think this opening statement for the article is what drew fire from the people who do not support CRT or critical race theory in the classroom. So I left the meeting. I didn't speak. I just was there to listen to people and to kind of catch a drift. Some of the people who were in favor of CRT said that the opening statement was misleading. Well, it wasn't until that I attended the meeting that I got a little deeper into the subject matter. The meeting was Thursday at 6:30 at Springfield High School. I'd never been there before. It's a nice-looking school. It's a school that doesn't look like a prison. Many, unfortunately, that were built later in the 60s and 70s do resemble prisons, and I've taught in a couple of them. But that's a matter of that's a different discussion. But the meeting started. There were about 20 people that showed up. Masks were obligatory because there has been a recent outbreak of COVID cases among students. The board president was there. I introduced myself on the way in, and it was a Zoom meeting with the other board members. I'd say there were 6 or 7 board members. I could be off by one. And there were as many as 200 people watching the meeting via Zoom, just like we're doing right now. This is a Zoom meeting, only it's on cable television. You have the opportunity to call in, just as people in the district or outside the district had the opportunity to call in and participate during the public forum on the CRT issue, whether or not it should be used in the curriculum at the Springfield School District. So evidently there was a curriculum camp that teachers attended during the summer. The superintendent spoke about this camp, and then there was a staff member who also spoke about the camp, who was at the camp in which they were talking about curriculum. And I was waiting to hear specifics because the superintendent spoke about 20, 30 minutes. And then the gentleman who was on staff, who was involved with the curriculum camp this past summer for teachers, spoke about 30 minutes, 40 minutes. So the meeting was, I'd say, almost 2 hours into play before we arrived at the public comment section, in which people could go up to a podium and had 2 minutes to express their concerns or their thoughts on curriculum and on CRT being implemented in particular. So a couple of people from Tuesday had shown up for Thursday's meeting, and they spoke against CRT, basically because of the opening statement in Mr. Hawk's article from 2017. And then other people spoke online. We shifted between the 20 people who were there and the many people who were online. And so we had a cross-section of people talking. Many people were teachers or former teachers, retired teachers. Some people were students, mostly female students, not too many male students. We had one person, one young man who spoke, who was in attendance at the board meeting in the library at the high school. And I would say, aside from maybe 4 or 5 people that were in the audience who were parents, most of the people online or via Zoom were in favor of incorporating CRT, critical race theory, into the curriculum. Some of them, one person spoke about how she had been a victim 20 years or so ago. I'm going to say 20 years because I don't know how old she was, but I'd say maybe she was 30. And that she had been called a name because of her race. And the teacher reacted to this like a deer caught in headlights. Didn't say anything, didn't do anything. The student that was calling the young lady names in 7th grade continued. Nothing was obviously done during class. The young lady went to the principal, and the principal basically offered the excuse that the boy didn't know what he was saying, and according to this version of the incident, that was it. That was 20 years ago. I'm hoping, I would trust that such a thing would not happen again, given the awareness of the inappropriateness and the hurt that such name calling would provoke. And then another young lady who was a student, was a former student, said that once she left Vermont and started mixing with other people, that she did not feel comfortable. And she blamed the school district for not preparing her to meet people who looked differently than herself. And my first reaction was, well, the school has a responsibility to make sure everybody is treated the same. Nobody is disrespected, nobody is bullied, and if it does happen, you bring the parties together and you work it out. This is according to the teacher, according to the parents of the students involved, according to the administrator, something gets worked out so that the issue is addressed and it doesn't happen again. But aside from that, it's really, I didn't believe that it was the school's responsibility. I think some of that is parents' responsibility in being a good example and not falling into the trap of being disrespectful to somebody who isn't there to defend themselves, so to speak. But I started thinking about this prevailing attitude of incorporating some type of look at race throughout different subjects. You've all probably heard of the accusation that and I'm sure Mr. Hawks would agree, that systemic racism is an issue in the United States. Well, surprise, systemic racism is an issue in basically every country on earth. It just depends on who the majority is and who is not in the majority. So I don't think our country or America has sole rights to that type of behavior. If you look at history, it seems to be that the people with the most technology, the most resources, lauded over people who have less, and that's been the case since we stepped out of caves. It's not fair, but it's to expect that things are fair from the outset is kind of unrealistic, and I think that there's perhaps another approach that might work without dwelling on what someone's appearance is. And that brings me to the point, during the curriculum discussion, there was mention of the school district's mission statement. And what struck me was that the mission statement dwelled on a person's identity. In other words, the outward appearance of that person, the ethnic background, the gender background. And I thought, if we just go by the outside appearance of people, the cover of the book, and we never open the book to see what's inside, to see character, we're shortchanging our approach to trying to reach a equitable system of instruction by going around in circles and chasing something that is skin deep. I thought perhaps a better choice might have been, instead of dwelling on identity, who I am, my age, my race, my gender, my religion, etc., my language, perhaps character, knowing the difference between right or wrong. For me, character would be, as someone who was brought up a Catholic and who still considers themselves a Catholic, character for me would be following the example in the Gospels. There are plenty of examples, and I think they're universal examples of how we interact with people, regardless of their religious background. So, not a small point, but it was I think we're off to a very tricky start when we start identifying or looking at people in their identity and we don't dwell on their character or what's inside them. Identity, judging people by their appearance is certainly easier. It's kind of a cop-out, in my opinion, because it lets us off the hook for not going deeper into that particular person, or if we're talking about culture of a group of people, going further into their culture. So, certainly, though, I can agree that race as an issue in general, just like religion as an issue in general, is something that needs to be discussed. I'm not sure it should be a veil for everything discussed, whether it's history, economics, politics, although it does play a role in all of these areas, science. Because we get away from the essence of what it is to be human, and we get hung up on the happenstance that I look different from somebody else, or I come from a different country, whatever. So my peeve, and I've mentioned this to Kurt, who is a frequent caller, frequent flyer on this program, I'm more interested in developing with our students the capability to critically think and analyze a situation and to seek out information from different sources to get a more fuller look at what a situation is, especially if I'm called upon to react to it or if it has an impact on my daily life. And the more we get out into the world, especially more people, the more impactful our interaction will be. So I would like to suggest for students, if we are to really raise critical thinkers, that we start by keeping the conversation as a possible topic, but using the channels of debate, of reporting, of free expression of thought, regardless of whether or not it falls in line with the general narrative, as a means of furthering the discussion and understanding, and being more honest about what is the problem or what is the challenge. Not so much what is the problem, but what is the challenge. Because if you look at it as a problem, you're pointing your finger at people, and I think pointing the finger at people because they may be a white supremacist, I don't think that's the answer. I think, again, diving further deeper into what makes us tick means going beyond identity politics, going beyond what we look like, and more so into what we think, what we believe, our belief systems. And so I would hopefully, I would like to see debate brought into the curriculum, at least on a high school level, whereby students are taught by good role models how to develop arguments. And when I say arguments, I don't mean fighting, but I mean a position, to take a position, and to develop the skill to take a position that personally you don't agree with, but you can defend by a logical explanation of, and I'm going to use this word, facts. So what are facts? Well, what is truth? I think we need to kind of get away from things being relative and saying, well, your truth is different from my truth. Well, actually, something happened or it didn't. Unless you're Bill Clinton and you're trying to get out of explaining what happened between you and an intern, whether or not that constituted an offense, you can hem and haw and twist the truth, but something happened or it didn't. I'm just using him as an example because many people are old enough to remember that that incident which marred his political career. So I think it's important to be mindful of differences, but by the same token, they should not be used in judgment, and they should not be used, regardless, as a point of departure for something else. And like I said, I would like to see not only debate being taught, in which people exercise in a form of friendly competition, defending a point of view, defending an argument, or standing behind a point, and getting that beyond the sound bites that we're fed through the news, beyond the emotion that just triggers us, so that we are training our younger people to be calm and with a certain degree of what's the word? Departure from emotion. Forget how to say that. But to look at something and then to kind of just go step by step and develop points of support or points of detraction. I think also as part of a curriculum, aside from critical thinking and debate, that we spend a little bit more time with geography and history, world history. I mentioned this at the meeting Thursday, that I think if we had stronger world history courses, stronger world religion courses, especially on Islam, and the trends in world events over the last couple of 100 years, which is a lot. It's a lot on one plate. I think we might avoid falling into the trap of another war. This is a decades-old problem. We fell into the trap of a war in Vietnam, and we've fallen into and just recently extricated ourselves from a very similar trap in Afghanistan. And it's my belief that had people, first of all, known where Afghanistan was, the type of country, the climate, the religious situation, the cultural situation with regarding how people make a living, religious beliefs regarding Sharia law in Islam, the role of women, the role of men, and not assuming that everybody thinks our way as far as equal rights, equal pay, a secular way of looking at life, one that does not rely on religious beliefs. Because in much of the world, people have been living governed by their religious beliefs for thousands of years. And to go in, regardless of whether it's revenge for 9/11 or looking for those responsible, to go in and then spend 20 years building a house of cards that falls when we and the other NATO troops withdraw is tantamount to war crimes. We lost 2,400 people over there. 22,000 people came back wounded. And we had 1,600 some odd people come back amputees. For what? For a house of cards, for a situation we did not understand. We assumed that in the beginning, George Bush, Jr. and Sr., Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, and others knew what they were getting into when they said, let's send the troops over and stamp out terrorism. Well, thousands of lives later, not to mention, and I am going to, 300,000 Afghani civilians killed during this past 20-year period of our involvement. We wound up with a house of cards that was costly in human life, in human suffering, and was a drain on our economy, unless you happen to manufacture weaponry for the military. Then it was a boon. So I'd like to think that with a better education system, talking about belief systems across the world, especially those that have been around for thousands of years and that are not going to change anytime soon, that we think twice before going willy-nilly and saying, well, let's go over there and kill terrorists. Let's go over there and see what we can do about the opium production. Again, I think if people knew more about where we went, be it Vietnam, Afghanistan, or wherever the next war is going to be, they would realize that a successful outcome is not likely. So, again, it's very easy to kind of get stuck into a rut whereby we watch the news and we're fed the diet that they decide on. And part of that diet is decided by the government. And we have been in the dark as far as the number of people that have been killed, not only in Afghanistan, but we also went through a similar type of occupation, very costly in lives, in Iraq. And we did get Saddam Hussein, who was a tyrant, who was a murderer. But there were no weapons of mass destruction, so that was a lie. So I think the lies are continuing, and I think as long as people are not learning what we're up against and relying solely on the Rumsfelds and the Cheneys, we're going to continue to have old men who have never served in the military sending young men to die overseas in very questionable wars. So that's my hope, that we have more critical thought nurtured in our curriculum, not just in Springfield School District, but in all districts in this country, that there's an awareness for the need for geography, history, because history does repeat itself. There's no excuse for us to go through a second tour of Vietnam. Not as many lives at lost, but the same principle. We do not understand where we are. We do not understand the people we're dealing with. We think that with technology, with bombs, we can make anybody submit. We did not make the Viet Cong submit. We did not make the Taliban submit. If anything, we fortified them. We made them stronger. So when an American journalist, a female journalist, asks members of the Taliban, will women have leadership roles? And they laugh, and they end the interview. It's just one small example of the disconnect between the world over there and our rose-colored glasses with which we see the world from here. So, CRT, I think there's bigger issues. I think there should be awareness that we are more than what we appear to be, and that in that essence, that interior self deserves more recognition than what's on the outside. So I want to thank you for tuning in, and I want to wish you all a good second weekend in fall, and get out, enjoy the weather before it starts cooling off, and take care. God bless, and have a good weekend.